Hi, this is Joe Socci again. Welcome to my calligraphy class. Before we start with the capital alphabet, I'm just going to give you some information as to the material list that you're going to need. So you're going to need the copy of the capitals. You're going to be needing a guideline that slopes to the right 5 to 10 degrees. You're going to be needing a plastic covering for that. That way when you write, you're not going to get the ink bleeding through the next page. And you're going to, as a worksheet, you're going to be needing a legal pad, wide ruled, and the instrument you should be using, unless you have others, I use a Speedball Elegant Writer number 3.0 mm, and that's will be in ratio to the lines on your pad. So try to get that before we start the class. And next, we're going to start talking about the capitals. Before we start actually writing these capitals, we have to have some understanding as to their structure, pen angle, and slope, and so forth. So let me review that. Well, let me give you that information first. That way you'll have a better understanding what I'm talking about when I refer to this angle and that angle and whatnot. All right, so the capitals are, if you look at the chart, you're going to notice, again, those little chairs, checkerboards. The capitals go from your writing line to your capital line, and they're 7.5 pen nibs high. So, as we were saying before, you know that the capitals are 7.5 pen nibs high, so that's a given. But you also have to remember that the capitals are at a 15-degree pen angle, unlike the lowercase, which the lowercase is, we know, is 45 degrees. Remember that when you do the capitals, you have to go at a 15-degree pen angle, and that's roughly it is 1/3 of your pen angle that you use for your lowercase. Lowercase is at 45, and here's an example here on the chart that where 15 should be. It's 1/3 of your 45, and so we know that the capitals are 7.5 pen nibs high. And just some information here as far as the length of some of them. Some of them go below your writing line. And let me give you the letters that do that, because that's very important since they're not all the same size. There's the G, comes about 3 nibs down. The first J, the longer J, another 3 nibs down. The Q, the tail of the Q, comes about 1.5 nibs below your writing line. And what else we have here? We have the 2 Y's. We have a longer Y, that's about 3 nibs down, and the second Y is about 2 nibs down. Now, also in addition to that, the slope of the capitals is the same as the lowercase, 5 to 10 degrees to the right. So they have the same slope. None of your capitals go any further up than your 7.5 pen nibs. Okay, so you're going to notice that the lowercase that goes up to your ascender line For example, here is the L's. They are taller than the A, than the capitals that I have on this sheet here, or any of the capitals actually, okay? So just to give you a proportion wise, you can see that they go way above, and some of the letters that continue down, for example, let's see, let's make a G here. All right. So the G goes all the way down. None of the capitals come all the way down here. They don't come to the center line. They're either above your second branching line or just a little bit below that. All right, so we have those proportions done. And now we're going to go to what we call the midsection of your capitals, and I'll discuss that next. Next, as I promised before, we're going to talk about these cross stroke or middle, where you put these cross strokes on the capitals and how you determine where you put them. Here's basically, I don't know if it's a formula, but this is what you have to do. You know that the capitals, all the capitals are 7.5 pen nibs high from your writing line to your capital line. That's a given. Now, what you have to determine, what you have to do is figure out half of 7.5 nibs, and that half of 7.5 is 3 3/4 nibs. Now, if you were to either mark up 3 3/4, you would get roughly in the middle of your waistline and your first, your first branch where half of your capital lays. Now, why is this so important? And it's extremely important because without this fact, you are going to destroy the proportion of the capital. And now, it's very simple. You just have to figure out where this half of 7.5 nibs is on your notepad. And again, I said, you know that the capitals go from your waistline to your capital line. Divide that in half. It'll give you 3 3/4 nibs. Where that is your halfway point. Now, some of us might have a little bit smaller nibs, wider nibs, or whatever, but since we have this notepad, it's very easy to do. You know, this is your writing line, this is your first branching line, and this is your waistline. If you were to take just this part here, forget about all those nibs or whatever, if you cut that in half, that is where your halfway point of all your capitals is going to be. That includes even the ones that come down to your third, below your writing line. This is where you have to determine that section, okay? That half section. So, why is it important? Because when you do these cross strokes, you're going to have to know where to place them. They're going to lay either on top of this point, they're going to be either below that point, or, of course, you have the exceptions, and here's one of them, the A, that's a little bit below that point. Next, I'm going to tell you exactly which ones go where, and that way we can start writing some of these letters soon. Okay. As I mentioned before, we're going to figure out where the halfway point, the middle of your capital is, and how you determine that. So we can come down here to the little script that I've done here. You know that your capitals are 7.5 pen nibs high. They go from your they go from your writing line to your capital line. If you divide that in half, that becomes your imaginary halfway point of your capitals. Another way to figure this out is if you go from your waistline to your first branching line, divide that in half or cut that in half, that becomes the same point, your halfway point for your capitals. Now, why is this so important? And I'm stressing this, and it is very important, is that when you're doing these capitals, you're going to have to decide where to put these cross strokes. And that point tells you they're either above that midpoint or they're below that midpoint. Or in this instance, with the A, it's slightly below that point. Let's look at the chart itself. It'll be a little bit clearer. So we look at that first line, and here's my imaginary halfway point of the capitals. By the way, even the capitals that go below your writing line, that imaginary point is only in one place. They can be as long as they are, but the halfway point is there. It's between your writing line and your waistline. 3 3/4 nibs. It's between your writing line and your capital line, halfway down. Okay? I stand corrected. Let me say it again. Your capital line, your writing line, halfway point is where these cross strokes go, either above that point or below that point. So let's start with the A. The A is one of the exceptions. Like everything else, there's a few things that don't follow the rules. The A, if you look at your chart, the A is slightly below. You can see a little white space there. On the B, this second stroke falls right on top of this cross. Now, if you go below that, this becomes bigger than the bottom, and it's going to look too top heavy. There's a reason for this, okay? On the E, it's right below. We're going to make this a little bit bigger, but there's a lot of things going on up here that make this appear a little bit smaller, but it's technically a little bit bigger than the bottom. Okay, on the F, the same thing. A cross stroke is below that midpoint. On the G, same thing, below that midpoint. H, below again. Okay, on the J, there's nothing really here for a midpoint, but I just want you to notice that this tail on the J is below your writing line, about 1.5 pen widths. Here comes the second J, the longer J. This second stroke here starts right at that midpoint, comes down below your writing line, and it's about 3 nibs down. The K falls on top of this first stroke, is on top of this midpoint, and that second stroke comes down. What happens here? This is smaller, should be smaller than your counter on the bottom. The L, if you look on the left side here, here's your writing line. If you notice, it's kind of tilted here a little bit. It's above It's these minute little details that I want you to look at that are going to make your letters stand out. Way a lot more than other italic alphabets. Here's the P. If you look at the P, it's an exception like the A. Here's your midpoint, and there's plenty of space before that stroke is completed. On the Q, here's a Q. Now, if you notice here, the Q starts about one nib above your your writing line. Comes over, this way, and then comes down. This is below your writing line, that little tail. All right, and on the U, what should we note about the U? This counter space here does not open up above your halfway point. Otherwise, this is going to look too big. All right, then we have the X. The X, you have to note two things about the X. That first stroke crosses right at your waistline. That's that first stroke. Second stroke, again, meets that first one at that waistline, and then meets the second one right on that halfway point. So you have two places to look on the X. Here's the Y. First stroke comes down about 3 nibs below your writing line. Second stroke comes down, and it does not meet that first stroke until about a nib below your waist point. You can see the white of the page there. Okay, here's the second Y. So the second Y comes down, but you have about 1 nib space between the writing line and the bottom of that belly of the Y, and this second stroke comes down about 2 nibs down below your writing line. Next, I'm going to talk about the width of these letters and where some of these, we call them serifs, where do they start? Where do they end? So that's another important feature that you should know. That way, when you start writing these letters, they're not all over the place, and they are consistent. That'll be coming up shortly. Our next lesson, as I mentioned before, was going to talk about these serifs, these end pieces here. Now, you have a choice, actually. If you don't want to put this little stroke here, you can eliminate it. For example, on the B, you have first stroke, second stroke, and then where you see the slash means that number one, the pen is picked up, and then you start with the third stroke, which is the serif. Now, some of them might have 4 strokes or whatever, but these little add-ons here are called serifs. Now, let me show you on your notepad that you're using, where do these serifs end up? Some of them are at the midpoint of your capitals. Some end on top. This is the waistline, and some of them end up somewhere in between. So let's review them one by one real quick, and we'll see where these serifs go. All right, on the B, you start just above your waistline and you come down to your midpoint. On the D, again, the same thing. You start in the middle of between the waist and the capital line, and you come down. You finish off at the midpoint of the capital. On the E, same thing again. Start off midpoint of between your capital line and your midpoint line of your capital, and you come down. So does the F, the same thing. Okay, and as we go down, well, let's do them one by one, that way we don't get mixed up. On the M, you notice it's a little shorter, and again, you start the same point as the other ones between your capital line and your halfway point of your capital, but this ends at the waistline. So does the N at the waistline. Now, it could be a little bit above, it could be a little bit below. We're not going to be that picky about it. As long as you don't go crazy with them, I think that'll be okay. Okay, the P is different than the M and the N. Different that it's a little bit longer. It's the same as the upper, we discussed the B, the D, the E, and the F. It comes down to that halfway point of the capital. Okay, we go to the next group, and we have the R. Again, that one stops at the waistline. So does the T. The waistline again, the U at the waistline, and the V, same thing. Okay, the next group is the W, X, Y, and Z. And if we look at the W, that serif ends right at the waistline. Okay, the X is a little bit of not a challenge, but it's really not a serif, but this left part of the X is somewhere in the middle between the waist and the capital line. Somewhere in the middle you start off. The Y, on the other hand, starts at the waistline, comes up, loops around, makes a nice loop, and so forth. Okay, that's the first Y. The second Y starts at the waistline. Ends at the waistline, excuse me. Ends at the waistline. And so does the Z. Now, these are important in a way because if you make them too long or too short, it's just going to distort the letters. So we want to be as true as possible to this alphabet. How many inches or how many millimeters, whatever you're working with, how wide are these letters? They're not all the same size. Let me just get this out of the way for a second. Okay, so what I did was I made a template, and each one of these squares, of course, is a nib. The nib that I'm working with, which is a 3 millimeter, and also I did the representing 5 nibs for each section of the line. Now I know that they're 7.5 pen nibs high from my guideline, from my writing line guideline to my capital line. There's 7.5 pen nibs. But how wide are these letters? So let's take a look at them. That way you can see a little bit more. And by the way, I did like a color chart. I colored them in by different their representative sizes. And you're going to notice that there's quite a variety here of sizes. And now some of them are very close to each other, so it might be a little bit more than others, but normally this is what they're represented as. That first group, which I have as green, is roughly 3 3/4 or half of the width. The width is half of the height. Now it could be 4 pen nibs. It could be, you could really look at it and say, okay, might be a little bit less or a little bit more, but it's roughly that. All right. The next color is the yellow orange. Now, the yellow orange is, let's see how many nibs we have here. 1, 2, we have about 8 nibs. So that's roughly the height is 7.5. This is a little bit more than 7.5, and it's almost a square. So the width is equal or close to the height. All right, that's the second group. So, and let's look at the, you know what? Let's look back at the green. We have the I, the J. Now that's the majority of the letter falls into that group. The other J and the S. The second group is this orange group, which is the width is roughly the same as the height, and that group is the B, the E, F, G, L, P, R, the first Y, the second Y, and the Z. So that takes care of quite a bit. It's what, 2, 4, 6, 8, 9. That's roughly almost a little less than half of the alphabet there. So that's a pretty good group to practice with. All right, and then we have this purple. The width of the letter is roughly 3/4 of the height. And I should have given you that one first if we were going by sizes, but you can see the difference here. And those letters, now some of these letters, you can look at the Q, for example. If the majority of the letter falls in here, then you have this swash, the serif, whatever you want to call it, that comes out of it. But it's roughly, the waist is about 3/4. It's roughly, the waist is about 3/4 of the height, and that equals to about 7. Let's see, let's take a look at here. Let's look at what we have. 6, we have about 6.5 nibs. Okay? Now if you could go all the way to the end of the, you want to be really technical about this, if you put the chart there, it runs about 7.5, and I have it marked down here on the chart, by the way, 7.5 nibs. So that's the third group. And then we have this purple group. Let's see. Now, if you do some of these charts, you can easily see a quick visual when you start writing that this one doesn't belong there, because that's a The N is a different color also, and the W. But with the purple, you have roughly, let's show you, about 10 nib wide. So you go from 0, here's your 10. It's a little bit more than 10 on the A. So, I mean, each one might be just a little bit more, a little bit less. Like, again, I'm not going to come around with a slide ruler to be that accurate, but it's if you're in with the vicinity of that width, I think you'll be okay. All right, and let's look at the ones that are which letters fall into that group. You have the A, the D, the H, the K, not the M, not the N, the T, the U, and the V. The V is a little less, but you know it falls within that category, pretty close. All right, and now you have your widest letters. They're a lot more than the width, and they're apparent as soon as you look at them. You have the M. The M is roughly 12 to 14 nibs wide. The W is 12 to 14 wide. This one, let's see, what do we have here? Yep, this one is 13. Okay, so you have the M, the N, and the W. I want you to be aware of those differences in the width, because that's going to make a big difference when you're writing, especially, and as you're practicing, which we'll have another video along the way that we will write these letters. You can practice knowing that information. But before you even start doing any of these letters, you should be aware of all this information, because you're going to have to apply it when you start writing, and that'll make your letters look as professional as possible, and a lot easier when you start writing. Thank you.